son. Thank you for the live audience that's here still. And thank you especially to Dr. Helen Messier. Dr. Messier, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
It is an honor to have you here in our podcast here in Lake Nona. We have a lot to talk about, but before we get into that, can you please give us a little bit of background of who you are and how did you come about to being here in Lake Nona with us?
How did I get to be in Florida, first of all?
Yeah.
I'm Canadian to begin with. Yeah, it's been a fun journey, interesting one, kind of longish. So we'll try to give you the brief version. But, you know, I started life as a researcher, did my PhD in molecular immunology, molecular biology, genetics, and was really, that was up in Canada. I was born actually in the very northern part of Canada, the Northwest Territories.
Oh, wow.
So very different from Florida.
Very cold.
Very cold, you know, and you have the land of the midnight sun, but also dark all winter. But so I started out, you know, doing genetics and doing my PhD. That's sort of my postdoc when I finished my PhD brought me down to the States for the first time. I ended up doing that in San Diego at the La Jolla Institute for Allergy and Immunology. And then sort of went, okay, now I did my postdoc and I love research, but what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And sort of decided, you know, I either go down the research track and you apply for grant funding every year. You're never sure where their next set of money is going to come from, and the whole academia is a difficult road. And so I remember talking to two friends of mine. One was a researcher in the lab with me. The other, her husband, was a physician. And I said, you guys have seen both sides. What would you do? And first thing, go to medicine. So that's what I ended up doing. Ended up getting my medical degree. I'm a family doctor. And then went out into practice and really noticed, the first thing I noticed was a lot of chronic disease in primary care, and that the tools that I was given in medical school were not enough to actually address that epidemic of chronic disease. I was able to take symptoms away, but I wasn't able to stop or reverse the progression of these diseases. And so I ended up going, there's something wrong with this. Why can't I actually help people? You know, can make them take their headache away or make them feel better for a little while. And so I went back to the literature and started reading and going, there's got to be something else I can offer these people. Lo and behold, the literature is filled with information. And I went, why didn't I learn this in med school? You know, it's sort of that was my first kind of introduction to what we call the translational gap, or what we know in the scientific world and what we actually practice in the clinical world is still about 15 to 20 years. And that's actually true still today. And so it got me going back and really looking what else I can do, starting to look at what we call root cause medicine. That got me down the track of functional medicine, realizing that, you know, I'm not the only doctor in the world that thinks this way, and that there's other people. And so I ended up, you know, being on the faculty of the Institute for Functional Medicine, learning this approach. And when you have that approach, can actually make a difference. So it went from, you know, I looked at my patient list of chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or some of those diseases where you really don't want to see the person because you know there's nothing you can offer them, to a point where I'm excited to see them because I can work with them and I know I can offer them something. And that totally changed the game for me.
Well, that's wonderful. You mentioned a lot of things that I resonate with. My father is a retired MD in Panama, which is where I'm from. And I remember him saying years ago that, look, if you get hit by a bus, go to the hospital,
Yeah.
have them fix you up.
Exactly.
Because you need it. You know, the medical system is very good at dealing with trauma.
Yes.
But it's not as good, at least to his eyes, it's not as good as dealing with prevention. and understanding how an ecosystem for an individual needs to be upgraded in order to prevent or treat disease. So it seems like you agree with that.
100%. I probably stole the phrase from him without knowing it, but I always say, if I get hit by a bus, take me to the acute medical care system. I know I will be looked after and taken very good care of. But if I have a chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, all of these chronic diseases, our acute care medical system isn't very good at it. We even talk about managing the diseases, right? We don't say we're going to cure the diseases. We don't say we're going to reverse them. We manage them. We manage your symptoms. We make you feel okay for a while. But we don't actually look at why did you get the disease in the first place? What can we do to address that? And then stop it from progressing, first of all, and reversing it. And when you actually look at those underlying factors that drive disease, you can absolutely reverse most diseases that we consider chronic. Autoimmune diseases, heart disease, diabetes, all of those things are absolutely stoppable and reversible.
So that's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm an engineer, but I'm a student of science. I love to read and associate with experts.
Yeah.
I love to hear from experts. Do you feel like we're at a place where we're converging more as a society to what you just said, that we can reverse some of these things? Or do you feel like we still have a lot of work to do to change that mindset?
I think there's still a long way to go. I think obviously it's a lot easier to prevent the disease in the first place. And once it's well established, it gets a lot harder. But you can. I mean, it's possible. I think in the medical community, it's still taking a while to resonate. Although if I look at my colleagues, the doctors that I teach a course on immunity, autoimmunity every year. We have about 1,000 doctors attending that course every year. So there's an interest in the medical community, absolutely, but I think the biggest interest is coming from the general population. They're getting frustrated with the state of their current medical system, not only just the whole payment model and all of that that's involved, but they're not getting the help that they really need. And so, that's led to the advent of a lot of, people, health influencers and people trying to, get in there and give different advice. But I think there's an opportunity to do this, in the right way. Not everything works. You have to, look at it. We always say, I think it was Groucho Marx that said, you want an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. So you want to do this in a very, evidence-based way.
I like that, evidence-based.
Yeah.
Do you still practice as a family doctor today?
I do. Actually, I don't see as many patients as I used to. I've finished maybe the journey that got me to Lake Nona here is, so I was practicing that medicine. I ended up founding a series of concierge practices in Canada because the model, again, in Canada the same way, the single payment fee-for-service model, where if you didn't see 8 to 10 patients an hour, there's no way you could even pay your overhead, right? So it was just not conducive to being able to work with people, try to figure out what was going on. It was driving their disease and really help them make lifestyle changes, all of those things that were necessary to halt and reverse disease. So the concierge medicine model allowed me that time to spend with patients. And you create that, we call it the therapeutic relationship, the doctor-patient relationship. And that's so powerful because that's a big part of the healing process. And so I founded a series of concierge practices. I ended up being recruited to HLI, Human Longevity Inc. I'm not sure if you knew that. That was Peter Diamandis and Craig Venter, the person who first sequenced the human genome, founded it. It was in San Diego. They found me and recruited me there, and I was there for a number of years, kind of one of the medical director genomics there. And that's what I met Peter Diamandis at that time. And, really the model there in the health nucleus at HLI was really being proactive, preventative, right? We were doing screenings for people, full body MRIs, CT scans, echocardiograms, doing a lot of blood work, really looking for early disease so that we could, again, like prevention's a lot easier than cure once the disease is established. So that's what really, I think, got me into this idea. Can we use latest diagnostics technology to find disease early? Because if you wait for symptoms to occur, you're missing 70% of disease, right? By the time someone is symptomatic, for example, of heart disease, they're going to have at least a 70% blockage, right? The vast majority of people that die of heart disease have no symptoms before they have a heart attack. And so being able to use technology to find things much earlier, I think, was so powerful. And that's what really got me into that whole concept of prevention.
And now you are here in Lake Nona.
And now I am here in Lake Nona. I'm the Chief Medical Science Officer of Fountain Life. And that's sort of Fountain Life, I would say, would be the next sort of newest, better iteration of what we were trying to do at HLI. I think we're adding in what was missing, I think, at HLI was this ongoing care. It's great to find things, and now you have to do something about them. And so that's really what we're trying to establish here. We're just across the street here, actually. And we do have the latest diagnostics. We say multimodal diagnostics. So we do, what that means is we'll do, say, a full body MRI to look for early tumors or cancer, but we'll overlay that with a blood-based test, multi-cancer early detection test. When you do different ways of looking for disease, you sort of decrease your chance of false positives and false negatives, right? You have different angles that you can look at things at, and that's really powerful. So we really focused at trying to identify the 4 biggest drivers of early death and disability, cardiovascular disease, cancer, metabolic disease, and neurocognitive diseases like dementia. And then we look at what's driving those. So looking at things like your oral microbiome and your gut microbiome, looking at toxins in your body, those things we know are big factors that drive disease. And so we look at all of that layered in with a care team, a physician and a nurse and a health coach. That's also really important, a nutritionist. They can help, because lifestyle change is also a really big part of it.
So that's basically full circle there. Because for those of you who may not know, Fountain Life has been now here almost 4 years?
We've been around about 4.5 years. Our first location was Naples.
Naples, correct, yes.
And we opened our center here in Lake Nona about 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
And our headquarters is right across the street, too. So we opened our headquarters about a year or so ago here. Yeah.
I remember when all that happened at one of the Impact Forum events, and of course, Tony Robbins was here because he's one of the co-founders, along with Dr. Diamandis and Dr. Ariri. And they were just very gracious with their time and talking to us about this model that is very data heavy, right? Let's get the data from the individual. Let's do the scans. Let's invest in the most powerful available technology that we have to our fingertips to try to give you a really good idea of what's going on and where you're going, what could be happening. But the key there is what you just said is once we find that out, then what can we do about it to prevent it from getting to that place, right? And in the case of Dr. Diamandis and how do we get to live to 100?
Yeah, he's all about sort of longevity, escape velocity, or this idea that technology is going to keep improving and extending our lifespan faster than we age, to the point that, you get that escape velocity and you don't die. Well, I'm not sure I sort of buy into that as much, but that's, it's kind of fun to think about, at least. But
it's a beautiful concept, and I'm glad that we're lucky enough to have this here right in our backyard. And what I wanted to ask you about, your story, as a immunologist, then as a doctor, as an MD, and now looking into the world of prevention, there is one element that at least I feel like we need to do better. Love your thoughts on this. I feel like it's getting not easier, but harder to convince the individual of what's good for them. Mm-hmm. Right? It gets everybody has access to Dr. Google.
Yep.
Right? And Dr. Google knows everything.
Now it's
right?
Dr. ChatGPT.
Or now we have Dr. ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. And technology is wonderful, but I'm not a doctor. I did research in engineering. And back in the very early 90s, when I was doing my first master's degree, research meant being in a lab, following the scientific process, failing a lot, and then eventually not failing, then you have to repeat it a number of times, then you got to get peer reviewed, and then you can publish something.
Yes.
Today, we have people saying, oh, I'm doing my research. Well, you're reading Google. It's not the same. Okay? And that's okay. Education is important. We should be reading, but we should also be questioning what we read. And it is my experience that although we're making great headway in providing the public with more opportunities to prevent, that on average, people are still doing some of the same things that cause disease. Do you agree with that, or do you see silver lining in all this?
I 100% agree with what you said. I think that's absolutely true. And there's a lot of, if you go online in the internet, it's filled with people touting different health information. Take this supplement and it'll cure everything, or this juice is the one, and it's anti-aging and longevity, and the world is, and there's so many people and there's so much information. It's really hard to distinguish what's real and what's not, what has evidence, what doesn't. And again, it's going to be, we're also in the era of personalization, right? There is no one diet that's right for every person in the world. There's no one right diet that's right for every person at every stage in their life. If you're very active and running and working out, you need a different diet potentially than, or if you're childbearing or postmenopausal. There's a lot of different ages, stages, and underlying genetics, biochemical individuality really, that determines something should be different for you. And so if there's someone that says this is for everybody, don't believe them, first of all. And also, if they don't change their mind when new evidence becomes available, I think that's a big red flag. A lot of people make their name out there and they become known as the lectin doctor or the whatever doctor, and they're not willing to look at new evidence. So the whole nature of the scientific process is what you just said, right? Testing it again, seeing it, is it reproducible? And the whole point of peer review is so that your peers can question it. They should be poking holes in it. They should be questioning. And so, and we start to learn more and more as science progresses. And so you need to be able to change your mind with new evidence. And I
love that you say that, because I have conversations like this regularly, and this idea, so I'm a lover of science, but I'm also a lover of common sense. And I love what you said about the individuality. Our bodies are complex, and what's good for me, even within myself, what's good for me now may not be good for me 20 years from now, or it may not, what was good for me 25 years ago may not be good for me now, because my body is renewing itself on a regular basis. But this idea that scientists are out there agreeing with each other couldn't be farther away from the truth. I don't know another group of professionals that really wants to disagree with each other, because what's at stake is very important. If somebody publishes something that is potentially life-changing, you bet that scientists are going to want to disprove it because of the potential repercussions of it. So this idea that, well, they're all agreeing, and it's like, no. Scientists, and in my case, engineers, we're looking for all the holes because it's important to do so. That's part of the process, right? Yes. So you agree with that?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. That's exactly what you should do. You should always question, and even in medicine, a lot of times, we don't have 10,000 people, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials for everything we do. Some of it's impossible to do, right? So we're always working on the best evidence available, and it's always a discussion with your patient, there's a level of risk that they're willing to take. Sometimes if the risk benefit, so if you're dying of cancer, for example, the benefit of a toxic chemotherapy is going to probably outweigh the risk. But if you're healthy, you're not going to be wanting to take that. That's a simple example, right? But so you always have to look at what are you treating, what stage is it at, and what's the risk tolerance of a patient as well. You can say, look, there's nothing else out there for you. There's a new treatment. We only have data in mice. Don't know if it's going to work for you. Here's potential side effects, and also allow the ability for people to decide what they're willing to do as well.
And that's where this new model of concierge medicine and the model of prevention, like what you do at Fountain Life now, could one day become something that is part of the day-to-day for everybody, because we need the data. Then we need to be able to talk to a team of doctors that is going to review that functionally.
Yes.
Right? Medicine has traditionally been very reductionist, where we're going to look at the heart and then we're going to look at the liver.
That's exactly right.
The people who's looking at the heart are not talking to the people that are looking at the liver, right? So I have high hopes, and I would love for you to expand on this, how you see this unfolding, that someday we're going to be able to gather all this data on myself, be able to discuss it with a team of experts, and then come up with the procedures or the processes that are going to create the ecosystem for me so that my epigenome has what it needs, so that genes are either upregulated or downregulated to make sure that I don't fall ill in XYZ way. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I couldn't have said it better myself. 100%. It will be personalized. I know that the data is really important, the individual data, and what we're doing now, with full body MRIs and CT scans or CCTAs, CT coronary angiography, where we use AI overlays to characterize plaque in your blood vessels, feeding blood to your heart. We can see soft plaque, we can see hard plaque or calcified plaque. We know that the soft plaque is the dangerous stuff. That's the stuff that can break open and cause a heart attack versus, most people now will do a calcium scan. The calcified plaque, that's the safe stuff essentially. That's the stuff that your body has walled off and protected it from breaking open. So we're looking very deep and always looking upstream, but that type of kind of analysis and diagnostics, they're still relatively expensive, right? So not everybody can afford that. But I think the fact that people that can afford it are paying for it, are looking at this, is building, just like the cell phone when it first came out. We had this, mine was this big, and it was, clunky, a brick phone. Didn't work very well, but it was crazy expensive, right? It's only because people bought them and, the technology continued to develop that everyone has one in their pocket now. The idea, I think, is the same. Our intent is, my intent especially, is to democratize what we're doing. Make this available to as many people as possible, but it's only by collecting the data, as you said. We're collecting not just the imaging data, but a lot of blood biomarkers, a lot of other data that over time we're going to see that, maybe we just have to do this simple blood test and we can predict it as well as doing the fancy scans. And so that's what we're going to get to, and that's going to make this type of analysis much more available to people. But you're right, with the ability of now AI as well. We do utilize AI. That's another thing. We have AI on our back end for our physicians, they kind of a clinical decision support tool, because we are collecting a lot of data. And it's hard for one person to kind of look at all that data and see the patterns and see. So the AI is very good at pattern recognition. It's good at not missing things in the data. And so we use that to support our physicians. And that's really valuable. And then on the front end, we have an app that allows people to ask it questions, on their data as well. But the fact that, yes, I think that is the future of medicine, is really collecting this data on yourself, understanding what you personally need, and then building that, what's your diet need to look like? How should you work out? Should you fast? Shouldn't you? Those are all things that can be very personalized. I love the fact that you talked about, the heart versus the liver. They're not separate, right? And that's true. People talk about dementia. Well, that's connected to everything. It's not just in our brain, right? Our head's not separate from our bodies. If you have inflammation in one part of your body, you have inflammation in your whole body, or oxidative stress, or other things. So you can't separate them. And that is what we tend to do in medicine, right? We send you to the one specialist. And if you have inflammation in your skin, you go see the dermatologist. If you have inflammation in your gut, you go see the gastroenterologist. But we don't actually understand that it's often very similar processes driving it all.